Welcome to the Fernow Experimental Forest. It's part of the Monongahela National Forest. We're just outside of Parsons, West Virginia. So this 4,600 acre, approximately, experimental forest was set up for the long-term study of watershed and silvicultural problems. Sometimes those overlap, sometimes they're separate. Some of the silvicultural treatments that have gone on here since 1949 approximately include uneven age management, variations of uneven age management, and even age management, including a hybrid of the two, a two-age system that we set up. The forest was established in 1934, but research really didn't get rolling to about 1949. The watershed is kind of split in half in terms of geology. There's a side where there's limestone geology and sandstone-derived soils with sandstone geology, and so you have very different forest types close together, which is one of the reasons this was set up as an experimental forest. Generally classified as mixed mesophytic, so we have common cherry ash, maple species, yellow poplar, black birch, yellow birch, and then we also have on our what we call our drier sites, we have red oak, white oak, chestnut oak, mixed in with magnolia, cucumber magnolia, red maple. We have pretty much everything but red spruce. So this part of the Fernow Experimental Forest is called the Zero Grade Trail. It's generally a low-grade trail that we set up through demonstration sites. And this is the longest running study on the Fernow, one of the longest in the East Coast, we think. It was started in 1949, set up as a demonstration for good forest practices. And there were some value-laden terms given to the management practices tested here. And to give you a reason of why, you have to think back to the history of West Virginia, the forests of West Virginia. So again, this was set up in 1949. This part of West Virginia was pretty much cut over by 1910, 1920s. So it was, no thought given to, wasn't silviculture. There was no thought given to what was left in the woods. It was just an economic cut. So there were things left in the woods, but it wasn't on purpose, economic driven. So you had large scale logging, fires that were out of the realm, out of the natural regime, and erosion happening. So those practices, we didn't want to recreate those practices. So these 5-acre blocks were set up to show private landowners how to manage their forests well. So we'll go through them. There's a diameter limit harvest, a clear cut, and 2 versions of single tree selection that kind of have become one over time. We'll talk about that a little later, why they became one version. But right now we're in the uncut or control because even though this is not a replicated study in terms of science, we needed to show some difference that our management, how does that compare to no management? So again, this was an area that had been cut over by the 1920s, 19-teens. So it's not uncut virgin land. This is a second growth forest that we're in. But we're starting to see some canopy gaps come because of grapevines tearing things down. We're on limestone soils. You can see our oak site index is 80. So that's a red oak at 50 years old. It's going to be 80 feet tall. Pretty good site index. We're on the limestone soils again. So we have some good growth happening in here. You can see our species mix on the Fernow here. We have beech in the understory, yellow poplar in the overstory, which should give you an idea. We have these big straight yellow poplars. But sometime in the past, there was a whole lot of sunlight getting to this ground. We have black locust, red maple, sugar maple. So this study, like I said, was set up to show private landowners how to manage their lands well. And what they meant in 1949 by good management was, are you getting a return on your investment? Are products coming out of this land, and is it perpetual? Is there a perpetual yield? Is what they were going for. And also looking at regeneration. So are the trees regenerating? We know that using the uneven age management, we're probably going to end up with shade tolerant species. And so that broad hypothesis was being tested here. But these, again, were mainly set up as demonstration sites for private landowners. Now this trail is really also very useful for bringing forestry students through here and just looking at those general concepts of forestry, the shade tolerance of different species, the structure. Pay attention to the different stand structures that you see with these different harvests. So again, it's a long-term study, still going on, and started in 1949. So this 5-acre block is our commercial clear cut example and demonstration. So this was cut in 1949. So again, the area had been logged in 1920. So a clear cut in 1949, not quite what we would do silviculturally, a little early, a little young, but to get this study going, they did the clear cut in 1949 down to 5-inch diameter. We're still on same site index. We've got high site index here. So we have northern red oak as our only oak species. Now the classic silviculture I was taught was if you want red oak and light loving species, you do a clear cut. In this study, a clear cut was considered a poor management choice. And now when I started my career, I was on the national forest side and I put in a lot of clear cuts and I didn't feel I was doing poor silviculture. But this again is set up to be a demonstration for private landowners and good management practices, and the scale is a little different. So this is a spot where we can think about the scale of our work as silviculturists and foresters. So if I was working with a private landowner who had 50 acres, would I put in a traditional 25-acre Forest Service clear cut? Probably not. Those ideas in the past and these value-laden terms that were given to these management practices, we don't tend to carry those on into the published work, but I like to talk about them out here in the woods with foresters, to think about those terms that we use, the ideas people might have about clear cutting, the visuals they have in their mind. So, this is almost 80 years on. It looks just like a forest to people because it is a forest. This is what happens when you clear cut. It regenerates. But again, in this study, they wanted to see return on investment. So if you're talking with a private landowner and they want money every 10, 20 years out of their forest, are they going to do it once and then have no more revenue for 80 years? Maybe this isn't the management strategy for them. On the national forest side, when we're managing a 4,000 acre compartment, put in some of these clear cuts to break up the age class structure at that scale. Again, getting back to that spatial scale and time scale of our work, how it differs between what our management goals are. So in here, in terms of regeneration and species, we do have the same species that we harvested, have recovered, have returned. We have red oak, black walnut, yellow poplar, not black walnut, black locust, sorry, and black cherry. It's some main species that we see. Are we going to have red oak when we harvest this again? We're scheduled to do this in 2020, might be 2022 till we get to this one in our harvest plan. I know we're probably going to have some trouble getting oak back on this site. So this next 5-acre block is the diameter limit harvest. So here, every 20 years, we're coming in and cutting any trees that are 15.5 inches diameter, breast height, and they're out. That's it. So this really isn't silviculture, but this was considered a fair practice when they started this study. And again, 1949, people have the image of the cutover lands of West Virginia in their minds. So this was considered sort of a compromise between management and no management. But some things to point out, it was every 20 years. So you are getting return on your investment every 20 years, but that's a longer time to help regrow from this kind of cutting practice. And we're on site index 80. So this one has good growth. I'll show you some of the data later. Regeneration is yellow poplar and sugar maple, and the brush that I'm standing in right here along the road. So in some terms, this might look good in terms of volume, but the value is definitely dropping in here. We have studies of long-term grade data, and we're just cutting out the grade 1 trees. And of course in hardwood, grade 1 is where a lot of your money is made. So when I have undergraduate students come along here, they think this, this looks good, this is easy, it's pumping out volume, but you don't need to hire a forester for this. This isn't truly silviculture. And again, the long-term nature of this is how long can this go on? So is this sustainable? Every 20 years, 15.5-inch trees coming out. Can we do this and sustain it? Right now, it looks sustainable, but again, not really silviculture. But you can see it creates a very different structure, of course, because we're getting into that partial harvest compared to our clear-cut and our uncut stands. This does create some interesting wildlife habitat. Bird people love it. There's a lot of structure here for the warblers. I will also say that in here is where we've seen tree of heaven pop up because of the disturbance that happens in here. So a negative that we can't quite quantify, but of this partial harvest technique. Now here we have this 10 years coming back in. Every 10 years we're on this good site index. We have an endangered plant that likes that combination of the good site and that periodic disturbance. So the plant is the running buffalo clover, and it is listed as federally endangered, although it's been proposed for delisting. It is a clover, Trifolium stoloniferum, and it like strawberries, it has runners, the stolons. So that is kind of an adaptation to get to the bare ground, and it likes to be disturbed, which is kind of troublesome when you're working with an endangered species. So we have to pretty much harm and kill individual plants to keep the population going. So when this plant was found on the Fernow, of course, it's endangered species. Oh no, got to step back, can't manage here. So we stopped managing on this skid road, put in a new skid road. The plants died out on this skid road, showed up on the new skid road. They like this periodic disturbance. You rarely find them off the skid road. They need a bare ground. They like this filtered sunlight. They won't always be out in the full sun, but it's not like they're going to show up interior forest without kind of ground disturbance. So we have long-term management here on the Fernow showing that relationship, that management, timber management and this plant go well together. So in this demonstration block, another 5-acre block, we're demonstrating single tree selection, true individual tree selection. So we've got that idealized curve you've learned about, where we know the Q factor, that ratio between the diameter classes. We have a maximum DBH to carry and a minimum residual basal area to carry. And we only harvest what is above that idealized curve, the trees that are above that curve. So every 10 years we come in. The sign says we're managing 11 dBH and larger. It doesn't mean that it's a diameter limit cut. It just means we're concentrating our efforts on saw logs for the saw log market. So we're just assuming things are going to grow in from those smaller diameter classes. Again, this was set up in 1949. This was considered a good practice, good to excellent practice. This is that classic German forestry that if you keep doing this every 10 years, you're managing your stand, you're taking the worst first, you're leaving the best to grow, and you'll always have wood. So you'll always have return on investment, return to the landowner, and focusing on the saw logs, we're increasing the grade in here as well. The percentage of grade 1 trees coming out has increased over time. We're also trying not to punch big holes in the canopy. Now right now we're standing along the skid road, so it's going to be a little more open. So the regen that we're getting in here, we have a little bit of yellow poplar, but it's mainly sugar maple, a little bit of beech in here. And we knew that from the start, that we were going to be changing the species, regeneration of the species in here, shifting it toward a shade tolerant dominance. And that's the single tree selection, of course, is that classic way to manage a shade tolerant species. However, we have red oak and black cherry, and we try not to take the last one, but at some point, maybe not in my tenure here, we'll be taking the last black cherry out of the stand and not getting enough light on the ground to regenerate it. Again, thinking of in terms of the management goals of a place you're managing and the scale and the spatial scale of what you're doing, this 5-acre block surrounded by other oaks and black cherries, maybe it's not a big deal that we're converting this slowly to sugar maple. But thinking back to how this stand began in 1949, again, we had that large cutover of all of West Virginia, basically. It was an even age stand to begin with, so we are kind of forcing this uneven age structure on an even age stand. And I will tell you that the last time this was cut, just last year, 2019, the winter of 2019, there were very few trees that came out of here, very few trees that were above that idealized curve. So in terms of economics, it may not have been a real economic sale, but it is sustainable. It'll be interesting to see if the next 10-year cycle we have more rebound, we have more growth above that curve. And that's why we have this long-term study. At the end of the zero grade trail in this last 5-acre demonstration block, we have what they considered to be the excellent management practice in 1949. So a variation of single tree selection. The sign doesn't have as much detail here. Same site index every 10 years, but here we were trying to manage down to the 5-inch diameter class. So you were doing that classic forestry, concentrating the site growth on the best stems every 10 years, taking out the worst of those that were above your curve. But this is where silviculture, great silviculture, excellent silviculture met the market needs. We ran out of places to sell our 5-inch diameter stuff, as you can imagine, about 20 years ago. So this 5-acre patch is now managed like the other one. We only go down to the 11-inch class where we're actually harvesting. You know, you can have the best silviculture plan, but if you don't have a market for those stems, you gotta be a little more flexible and figure out what'll work best. So some of the same considerations, that we have the species change going on, but we are increasing the grade in here as well. And another patch of our running buffalo clover at the end of the day.